Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospective. So, as I stated last time, we're kind of nearing the end of the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, for now anyway. And as a result, if we want to wrap this up, we gotta get through the second half of the finale era, as I call it. And, well, we've already seen the end of the Spider-Verse, so now it's time we get to the death of the Venomverse. But before we do that, we got some lead-in material to look at. And, well, previous Spider-Verse themed storylines have had Edge of miniseries to help get you introduced to them. And while this one also had an Edge of miniseries, that was a digital only book, and since I said I'm not touching digital comics, I am not going to be looking at that. However, there was a physical lead-in series that was released in trade format, and well, anyone else can be Edge of insert name of verse here. Only the death of the Venomverse can get extreme! Yeah, it's called Extreme Venomverse. Pretty much, it serves the exact same purpose as all the other Edge of miniseries. It's basically just an anthology of stories focusing on different versions of Venom across the multiverse in order to just, set them up for the event proper. But with that said, is it a good lead-in series? Is Extreme Venomverse just as worthy of being a lead-in to Death of the Venomverse as all the other Edge of miniseries? Well, let's take a look at it and find out. And of course, to kick things off, we'll be starting off with Extreme Venomverse number 1. Now, a bit of a heads up with this miniseries. Much like the last Edge of Spider-Verse miniseries, this one actually does have a set amount of stories. As like the previous two Edge of Spider-Verse series, each issue actually has multiple stories focusing on different versions of Venom, with one story focusing on one story focusing on another, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple stories per issue. However, much like the previous, which brings me back to what I was going to before, much like the previous Edge of Spider-Verse miniseries, there are a set amount of stories in each issue, except for the final one. In this case, issues 1 through 4 of Extreme Venomverse have 3 stories per issue, while issue 5 actually has 4 stories. I'm just kind of giving you a heads up because that explains how many there are in there, but, I'm just giving you, just giving you a heads up for the sake of giving you a heads up. But anyway, with that said, what Venoms will we be seeing today? Well, let's start with the first story, and this one's actually one I was really looking forward to even before I read this miniseries. So, we know the story of how Venom became Venom. That Spider-Man first bonded with the alien symbiote, thinking it was just a black suit that made him stronger, until, well, things started getting wonky with the suit and he realized it was alive. He wound up projecting it, it went to Eddie Brock, and their combined hatred for the webhead turned them both into Venom. But for the sake of clarity, we kind of need to go over some of the specifics of the story. Mainly the comic version, the original version. Now, in the original Black Suit Saga, when Peter first discovered that the symbiote was actually a symbiote, he wasn't exactly happy. Although, in the case of the comics, rather than the symbiote controlling his mind and influencing his decisions, it actually just took control of his body while he was sleeping, and he pretty much did a bunch of hero work overnight, resulting in Peter feeling fatigued the next day. Eventually, Peter went to the Fantastic Four to figure out what the heck was going on with this, and Reed was able to tell him that his suit was actually alive, which freaked Peter out something fierce, and resulted in him wanting to get rid of the suit. Reed was able to thankfully use a sonic cannon to get the suit off, but as Peter left, leaving the symbiote behind, it managed to escape from the Fantastic Four and wound up finding Spider-Man again and rebonding with him, essentially trying to force itself on him. Peter, not wanting this thing in his life, wound up going to the Our Lady of Saints Church and managed to use the sound of the bell tower to force the symbiote off of him. Now, in the original series of events, doing this was dangerous, both for Peter and the symbiote, as being in such close proximity to the bell tower, it would mess anybody up. And as a result, as the symbiote was slowly being forced off of Peter, he himself was actually feeling the effects of being in such close proximity to this bell, and it was causing him to get weaker and weaker as his body was essentially being torn up from the inside because of being in such close proximity to this loud object. And ultimately, in the comics, after the symbiote left Peter, for a brief moment, it didn't want him to die, and as a result, it wound up going back and managed to get Peter far enough away from the bell, even risking its own life, and managing to essentially save him, though ultimately that was the final act of goodness the symbiote exhibited before it resented Peter for what he did, and, well, the rest of the story. However, in this version of events, Well, everything goes according to the original story. Peter goes to Our Lady of Saints church and forces the symbiote off of him. Of course, it tries fleeing, and like in the main universe, it has a moment where it realizes maybe it does want to go back and help Peter. Only in this reality, it was too late. When the symbiote goes back to try and get Peter, it only finds his dead body. And well, you know how the big motivating factor for Peter being Spider-Man was his failure to save Uncle Ben? Well, this moment sticks with the symbiote as, well, it blames itself for this outcome, mainly because Peter already got rid of this thing earlier, and then the only reason Peter went to these extremes to get rid of it now was because it tried to force itself on him. And as a result, the symbiote feels responsible for Peter's death here. And ultimately, that guilt gives the symbiote a great sense of responsibility. As a result, much like in the main universe, the symbiote ends up staying at the Our Lady of Saints church until one particular man comes by. And just like in the main universe, that man was Eddie Brock, coming to the church because he was contemplating suicide and was seeking spiritual guidance. And of course, much like in the main universe, the symbiote sensed a kindred spirit with Eddie. Only in this case, rather than it being a shared hatred for Spider-Man, it's in this case, it's a sense of a redemption, wanting to find forgiveness for either what they have done or what they are about to do, and the symbiote wound up sympathizing with that. And as a result, much like in the main universe, the symbiote wound up bonding with Eddie Brock. Only in this reality, rather than the two of them becoming Venom, they became a new Spider-Man. And let me see if I can find a good shot of that. Let me just see if I can find a good shot of them, because I actually like this. I actually like the design. Yeah, this is their version of the Spider-Man costume, which I dig. It's essentially, it has this a standard resemblance to what you'd expect from a Venom costume, but I do kind of like the little bits of the webbing around his arms and boots. Sorry, I'm just getting a better look around the sides. Again, it's unique, but still maintains the actual Spider-Man motif, but also being recognizable as a Venom. And quite frankly, I dig it. It's cool. And as a result, after the symbiote bonds with Eddie, rather than the two of them going on to essentially become the lethal protector or the bane of Spider-Man's existence, they carry on the webhead's work. The symbiote essentially wants to do what Peter did. It wants to try and be as it actually says in the story, the best parts of Peter stayed with the symbiote. And so, rather than it being murder hungry, wanting to eat brains, it just wants to help people. It goes around saving lives with Eddie being essentially its host. And what I find interesting is that the whole story is narrated by Eddie, and he even admits that the symbiote doing everything it's doing, he has no idea if this is something that he wants to do or if it's the symbiote pushing him. Because of their bond, their thoughts are constantly intermingling, and so Eddie has no idea where he ends and the symbiote begins. So he begins even wondering that if this desire to help people is actually something that he wants to do, or if it's just the symbiote pushing him into wanting to do that. Again, it's interesting stuff. Hold on a second. Sorry, dog-related shenanigans. But yeah, like I said, Eddie has no idea where he begins and where he ends and the symbiote begins, and whether the sense of responsibility is something he wants to do, or if it's the symbiote pushing him in the right direction and pushing him in that direction. But either way, regardless of where this sense of responsibility is coming from, when you take on the mantle of Spider-Man, you also kind of inherit his baddies. And sure enough, the story actually does showcase Eddie and the symbiote as they're going around doing hero work, as they end up clashing with Doc Ock, who is basically in the middle of a bank robbery / kidnapping. Thankfully, with the intervention of Spider-Man, I guess, he manages to save the guy and manages to kick Doc Ock into a building. As such, after the guy is safe, he encourages Spidey to go kick Otto's ass, and so as Eddie swings in after him, well, he and Otto end up getting into a tussle, but ultimately seems to end as Eddie manages to web Otto to a wall. So it looks like everything's all good, but this is Doc Ock. He's smart, and he manages to use one of his tentacles to grab a girder in the ceiling, because I think it's like an older building, but don't quote me on that. And he tries to bring it down on Eddie's head. Thankfully, the good old spider sense kicks in. He manages to avoid the girder, but as Otto manages to block the girder before it can hit him using one of his tentacles, well, the resultant loud noise from metal clanging on metal has an adverse effect on the good Mr. Brock because, hey, symbiotes don't like loud noise. As such, Otto immediately sees this and decides to take advantage of it as he uses two of his tentacles, as he just starts banging two of his tentacles together, creating more loud noise, which weakens the bond between Eddie and the symbiote enough that it starts coming off. As such, Otto is able to grab the symbiote, and he quickly realizes that while the previous Spider-Man had his spider powers be an innate part of himself, Eddie has no superpowers unless he's bonded with this pile of goo. And while Otto admits that the suit is fascinating and a lesser mind would want to take it for themselves, well, Otto's a genius and he'd rather just get rid of the competition, so he just grabs the symbiote and keeps banging his tentacles together to try and kill it. However, Eddie, now free of the symbiote, is able to finally think for himself again without the symbiote, pushing him in any direction. And the one thing that Eddie's thinking for himself is, fuck this guy. As such, Eddie manages to grab a loose brick from one of the webs that he wound up webbing up, and he chucks it right at Otto, hitting him in the head, which, yeah, that probably would kill him, but you know what? We'll let that slide, as it does knock him out, and it does manage to stop him from banging his tentacles together and dropping what's left of the symbiote. As such, Eddie quickly realizes that he does actually want to do good here, and regardless of where the best parts of him came from, he is proud of them, and he wants to keep doing it, and he wants to keep doing all this good work with the symbiote. And so, as the pile of goo is on the ground, he's just praying that it's not dead, and sure enough, the symbiote's fine, as it still has enough strength to keep going, as it rebonds with Eddie, and the two of them are Spider-Man once more. And so, as Otto regains consciousness, well, Eddie stands over him and delivers a final coup de grace and knocks Otto out again. As ultimately he and the symbiote web Otto up and bring him to a police station, or just hanging from a streetlight. So, all in a day's work. Eddie and the symbiote have a stronger bond than ever. They both affirm that they're Spider-Man now and forever, and that they'll keep defending the city to their last breath, yada yada yada. Well, ultimately, gotta remember this will lead into to Death of the Venomverse, and so after they drop off Eddie, a portal opens, and it's here we see the recruiter for what's going on with Death of the Venomverse, Agent Venom. More specifically, a version of Agent Venom who is one of Eddie's old lovers, a girl by the name of Anne Weying, who you may remember that name if you've seen the Venom movies. And yes, Anne was one of Eddie Brock's love interests, so the two of them are intimate, so to speak. It's just that in this universe, she eventually took on the Venom symbiote and thus became that world's Agent Venom. She's even the head of her own team of Venomized heroes, which apparently was explored in some of the Venom solo series, which I haven't read, so apologies if I know nothing about them. But either way, she's the one that's gathering the Venoms here, and she's here to recruit Spidey because, hey, he's technically a Venom too, so whatever's going on in the multiverse, it affects him. So that's the end of that story. As for the second story, well, this one also gives us an interesting take, because, well, what if the Venom symbiote wasn't bonded to just one individual? What if it was a family? So, yeah, that's where this story kicks in, as we're brought to a universe where Eddie and Anne are married, and they are both playing host to the Venom symbiote in one way or another. And unfortunately, that connection has passed along the gene pool, as in this reality, just like in the main universe, Eddie and Anne had a son, Dylan Brock, who, in this reality, I'm guessing a conception of him was a lot more natural, as apparently in the main universe, Eddie didn't know about Dylan, and even how Anne conceived Dylan was through weird symbiote genetic makeup, whatevers. My point is, in this reality, they had Dylan like a regular kid. The only problem is, Dylan also shares a bond with Venom. And while at first, Dylan didn't seem to show any connection to the black pile of goo, well, one day when he seemed to hit puberty, he venomized, and his mom freaked out so much that she didn't even try to stop him as he went on a rampage and burst out of the house. Mostly because, well, for the most part, Anne and Eddie have their connection to the Venom symbiote under control, well, it was still a hard battle, and apparently Anne had to fight hard just to maintain that level of control. So when she saw her son, well, venom out, so to speak, it kind of brought all those fears to the surface, and thus she did nothing while her son lost it and ran away. As such, when Eddie comes home and sees all this, he's able to figure out exactly what's going on, And while Anne is freaking out and blaming herself for not being able to help, able to help Dylan, Eddie tells her that it's fine, that she has that if she hadn't had if she didn't wasn't able to control the Venom symbiote as well as she could, then she wouldn't be standing there right now and all that jazz. Basically, Eddie is just trying to tell her it's not her fault, and he'll go and get Dylan right now. But sorry, Soda. But Anne pretty much just tells them no, this is kind of her fault, so she wants to go with Eddie. As such, we then cut to Dylan as we see him kind of recovering after his episode. As it turns out that he's on the smelly mattress of the backseat of a car under an underpass, and the one that brought him there was a young girl named Leah who ran away from an orphanage. She managed to find Dylan passed out on the street after his venomized episode, and brought him here to try and recover. As such, she offers the two of them, team up because, well, they're both runaways, but Dylan is still freaking out as he kind of went nuts back there, and so rather than wanting to continue being on the run, rather than going along and being with Leah, he wants to try and figure things out on his own. Although Leah begins kind of pushing him and making fun of him after this, telling him that why'd you run away? It's because mommy and daddy didn't get you that special toy you wanted. At which point Dylan yells at her and tells her to knock it off, which in turn brings the symbiote out as he goes full Venom and grabs the car that Leah is in, threatening to eat her. Of course, Dylan from inside is trying to tell Venom not to eat this poor girl, but Venom's kind of taking advantage of the situation right now. Basically, in Venom's eyes, Dylan is at that young age where Venom can now start asserting control, but he doesn't need Dylan there the whole time. Basically, he'll keep enough of Dylan's consciousness there so that he can sustain the body, but otherwise the rest, he's just gonna bury deep, or even just kill it. Either way, Dylan's at a young enough age that Venom can assert control and not have to worry about consequences. So, after Dylan is buried deep, the Venom is getting ready to, eat Leah, until someone else arrives. Specifically, Eddie Brock, as he venoms up and manages to duke it out, and manages to knock his son aside before he can eat the innocent girl. As such, father and son start duking it out in the street, as venomized Dylan continues trying to chuck things at Eddie. And while Eddie is able to withstand it because, well, he's got the symbiote too, he doesn't want to hurt his son too much. And in the meantime, after Leah is safe, Anne manages to come in and tells her to get away, especially since that's her son in there. Although seeing all this violence, it does kind of puts Anne in neutral mode, so to speak, as she looks at this and she feels guilty because when she looks at Dylan, it just reminds her of herself, and she's afraid that she's just a bad mother, that she let Dylan get that far because she was too afraid of facing this thing. But Leah just tells Anne to get over herself, because she's probably known plenty of other mothers who would abandon their not monster kids over even less than this, and yet here Anne is right now having this existential crisis while her husband and son are duking it out in big slimy black suits, and, well, anyone else would be freaking out, and yet here she is. And yeah, she's still freaking out, but at least she's not running. So Leah pretty much just tells Anne to get off her ass and get some self-confidence because her kid kind of needs her right now. And this actually does give Anne a good kick in the pants, as she manages to essentially assert enough control over her part of the Venom symbiote, and she venoms out as well and manages to knock out Dylan, whereas internally, she manages to reach into the part of the symbiote's consciousness that Dylan was buried in, and she manages to pull him out, essentially getting Dylan out of Venom's clutches, and just eventually letting him know she's there for him. And as a result, this combined effort does manage to calm Dylan down in the real world, and thus, well, Dylan's back in the driver's seat. And so from there, the Brock family is doing a lot better. Leah becomes a family friend who stops by and essentially is kind of sort of like adopted into them, I don't know. But ultimately, Anne and Eddie decide that they're going to try and teach Dylan how to properly use these powers and, get better control of them so he doesn't have any other episodes. And Dylan even asks and Dylan, of course, is afraid what would happen if he could lose control, and even if he doesn't lose control and learn to control them, he wonders what he'll even do with these powers. But Eddie and Anne assure them that they'll figure that out together, and that's where the story ends. It's sweet. As for the final story, this one is, I can't believe I'm saying this a third time, it's again unique. So, the Venom symbiote's an Oni. I think. I don't know. Basically, in this reality, rather than the symbiote being a pile of alien slime that bonds to a user, it's something contained within a samurai sword. And the resident venom of this universe is not Eddie Brock. It is a man by the name of Tetsuya. Hold on, let me just look at his name. I gotta remember it because they do say it, because they do at least say it. His name is Takamoto Tatsuya, and basically in this reality, the government is, well, futuristic, highly advanced, so to speak, and basically the only people who can live in this nice little society are people who can afford it, and of course they have enforcers, they have soldiers, and well, Tetsuya was one. We used to work for this. We used to work for the government, and of course, the government is Oscorp. But during an excavation, they managed to find the samurai sword housing what essentially was this world's Venom symbiote. And when Tetsuya picked it up and unsheathed the sword, something from the sword latched onto him. What from the outside looked like a living pile of slime. And well, after unsheathing the sword, well, Tetsuya's mind kind of went blank, and when he finally regained consciousness, he found that everybody else was dead except for him. So yeah, very violent. As such, ever since Takuya found the sword, he's been on the run from Oscorp because, well, this thing is dangerous, and he doesn't want it falling into the wrong hands, and so he's just kind of trying to hide in the underbelly of the city, of going into lower districts, essentially just trying to get out of town and try and keep this thing in line so that Oscorp doesn't get their hands on it, as well as, trying to get control of this thing because, well, it's clearly nuts and it's clearly latched onto him, so, yeah, I can't exactly get rid of the sword. As such, the story actually starts properly as we see him riding in a train that's heading out of the city, as he's talking to a woman named Marion, who basically is already aware of his connection to the Venom samurai sword. As basically they're trying to get out of the city just in time to want to make sure that nothing is tracking them, and even if something does happen, they have backup for that, as they have a bunch of weapons, and Takuya has the sword, though. Yeah, hold on again. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I don't get it wrong, okay? Yeah. Tatsuya! Fuck, I'm sorry. His name is Tatsuya, sorry. Basically, Tatsuya has the sword, so they want to make sure that, and so, while they consider that a last resort, because again, he has no idea if he can control this thing. Though Marion assures them that maybe he won't need to, so maybe it'll be fine. Unfortunately, those good tidings go out the window as they look outside the train, and they see something red flying through the sky. They're going to try and assume that maybe it's just a drone, but word from the front of the train lets them know that there's something latched onto the train, so Marion goes to investigate and leaves Tatsuya behind, telling him that it might be nothing. It's not nothing. It's actually because you see, there's a Sinister Six in this universe, as Oscorp has sent 2 of their members there, with the first one being on the train right now. Specifically, the Scorpion. And, okay, I'll just say, I think he does look kind of cool, though I can understand why people wouldn't like the design. Let me see if I can find it here. Basically, in this reality, the Scorpion, rather than looking like a standard supervillain, is a guy in a white suit, who we only can identify as the Scorpion because, 1, he has a scorpion tail, and 2, they call him a Scorpion. Basically, he's an enforcer for Oscorp, and he's here looking for Tatsuya because, well, Oscorp wants the samurai sword. And as such, he's willing to kill everybody on the train in order to do it, even threatening one of the passengers. Of course, Marion arrives, and, well, the Scorpion ends up threatening her and tells her, "You have something of ours, we want it back, tell us where it is." And so Marion kind of folds and says that it's in the back cargo card. And while Scorpion thanks her for the information, he does want to at least make sure that the information is legit. Unfortunately, before he can check, that's when Tatsuya arrives, as we see he's unsheathed the sword and has gone full Venom. Though it looks like he's mostly stable, as he hasn't gotten the Oni mouth yet. It looks more like just a blank white face mask type of deal, with of course some minimized feature. Actually, let me see if I can find again a good look for him. Like there, this is Tatsuya in his samurai Venom outfit. Again, Looks cool, has enough of the original motifs. As such, Tatsuya starts duking it out with the Scorpion, and for the most part, he's able to keep him kind of on an even keel, but ultimately the Scorpion manages to overpower him and is ready to just kind of peel the symbiote off of him bit by bit. But it's at that point when the feral nature of the symbiote comes out, and Tatsuya almost gets ready to tear the Scorpion limb from limb, but thankfully that's when Marion shows up and shoots the Scorpion with a blaster and knocking him out, ensuring that Tatsuya doesn't need to go apeshit. As such, they open up a door and decide to toss the Scorpion out just as he regains consciousness, but the people on board the train are freaking out because they realize, hey, Oscorp sent one of the 6 here because the guy with the samurai sword is on board. Why are we still harboring him? But Marion assures everyone that while they may be afraid, Tatsuya is they can't hand Tatsuya over. Even if they wanted to, odds are Oscorp would still kill them anyway, so they just got to keep moving. Unfortunately though, that moment of calm doesn't really last because Tatsuya notices something. Hey, remember that red light from earlier? What was that? And well, they get an answer as something blows up the back cargo cart of the train, and that something was the red light, who it turns out was this world's version of the Vulture, who is still circling around and targeting the train. As such, as the train is approaching a tunnel, the last cart is kind of dragging along, especially since the train is now on a bridge, and, well, if the train tries going through the tunnel, odds are that last cart's not going to let them make it all the way through. As such, Tatsuya and Marion kind of come up with a plan. Basically, they're going to try and get all the passengers to the front of the car, and while Tatsuya's going to stay behind and try and unclasp the passenger car from the front of the train. Unfortunately, while this seems to almost go well, as the passengers manage to get up there and Tatsuya is riding on the outside trying to uncouple the train, well, it turns out the Scorpion is still alive as he rushes in and tries to grab Tatsuya because, well, he still wants to kill this guy and he doesn't want to peel his skin off his dead corpse in an explosion. But it's here where Tatsuya gives into the rage more, as we see the Venom smile come out, and he ends up biting the Scorpion's tail and manages to actually rip off the clasps and hold Scorpion in place. And when Scorpion realizes what he's trying to do, well, it's too little too late, because at that point the Vulture manages to land a second explosion on the passenger car, and thankfully the front of the car manages to escape with everyone on board safe and sound. As such, the Vulture asks his boss if he should go in and make contact, but his boss tells Vulture that their only concern is to get the package, i.e. the sword. So ultimately, the civilians are of no concern to them. Thankfully, though, Tatsuya did survive the explosion. Unfortunately, the Scorpion did not. As we see Tatsuya in the wreckage of the train, as he's now sheathed the sword and gone back to his human form, as he decides that if he wants to actually learn how to control this thing, then he might need to go to other sources. And thankfully, he has a lead in the form of Oscorp, since though they are interested in getting this thing. However, as Tatsuya goes on to his investigation, with the comic cutting ahead to a few weeks later, as he's gone back to the city and hiding in its lower rings, well, again, this is where we have to remind you the story is a lead-in to Death of the Venomverse, as a portal opens up and from it comes the Anne Weighing Agent Venom, who is once again here to recruit Tatsuya to the Venom Army. And when Tatsuya realizes that Anne is actually more in sync with her symbiote than he is with his, well, Anne says that where they're going, there's plenty of other people that he can learn from and gain more control over this. And she asks if he's in, and thus the story and the comic ends with him agreeing to come with them and them going back to the portal. So there you go. Alright, so my thoughts on these stories. Well, first, let's look at the Spider-Man story. And this one, like I said, is one that I was genuinely looking forward to reading even before I got this trade. Because I did hear how one of the versions of Venom in these stories was a version of Eddie Brock who went on to be Spider-Man. Because, well, I think it's an interesting angle. The thing is, Venom has always meant to be a dark doppelganger to Spider-Man. After all, he's got all of his powers, but stronger. He's got that big white spider symbol on his chest. Ultimately, regardless of whether you like Venom for the symbiote goo or whatever, he's essentially an evil Spider-Man. Or at least an anti-hero Spider-Man. Basically, Venom has always kind of been a dark reflection of the webhead, but what if we look... So the idea of a universe where Eddie Brock was genuinely Spider-Man, was not actually hunting the guy down, but trying to do right by the name... I like it. I think it's an interesting angle, and quite frankly, I like how they handle it in the. I like how they handle the concept in the story, as they do show you where the point of divergence is in this reality. As like I said, in this reality, the symbiote was too late to save Peter when he went to the when he died when he went to Our Lady of Saints when he went to Our Lady of Saints, and as a result, the symbiote wound up. As a result, rather than feeling resentment for being abandoned by Peter, the symbiote felt an immense guilt in the same way that Peter felt guilt over the death of Uncle Ben. As the symbiote blames itself for putting Peter in this position, since, well, he only came here to get rid of this thing after it tried to force itself on him, and so as a result, the symbiote's pretty much is just beating itself up the same way that Peter would beat himself up, and pretty much decides I want to do good by this man. I want to actually do right, and so I'm gonna carry on his mantle. And so when the symbiote bonds with Eddie, rather than the two of them becoming another Venom, they actually go on and become a Spider-Man. And it's actually really interesting and really nice. Like I said, I love the design for their costume, and there is no ulterior motive. At the end of the day, Eddie and the symbiote are trying to do right by Peter's name. They were trying to carry on the legacy in the most respectful way possible. They're not dragging his name through the mud. They're not doing horrible things that Peter would have never done. They're actually trying to take the name Spider-Man and still make sure it means something, including when he dukes it out with Doc Ock. Even in that set of circumstances, when Eddie and the symbiote are forced to separate thanks to Otto clanging his tentacles together, Eddie is still wanting to do the right thing, because ultimately, regardless of whether that sense of responsibility was his or the symbiote's, he was actually doing good in the world, and that actually gives him a new zest. That gave him a new angle on life. Actually inspired him again, made him want to do good by other people, and so he wants to still do all these things with the symbiote, because at the end of the day, it's not one or the other. It's not one of these two entities that make them Spider-Man. It's them both together. They both want to do good in the world, and quite frankly, I think I like that. It's a unique take on both the Venom story and an alternate Spider-Man. Again, it's really cool, and it kind of makes me want to see this version of Eddie kind of fight alongside the other Spideys in the multiverse, because I kind of would love the idea of them meeting him and learning his story. Hell, how would this version of the symbiote react when learning about what happened to its counterparts in other universes? Would it be angry? Would it be understanding? Like, if it saw Peter and learned about what happened, would it actually feel happy that he's still alive, or feel a little angry that Peter still grows to resent it? Or would would it actually understand as it realize, no, he's right. I tried to force myself on him. Of course he wouldn't like me. So I kind of get it. So I kind of get it. But at the very least, I think that would lead to an interesting arc. But the point is, the story. But that's another thing altogether. My point is, the story itself is actually pretty nice. I like it. I like it. It's a different take on the Venom story, while also being a unique take on Spider-Man. As ultimately, rather than Eddie and the symbiote going down a dark path and becoming the twisted web slinger we know, they become the webhead in their own right and try to honor the name as best as they can. And thus, it's just kind of cool seeing them in action. I quite frankly would love to see more of this universe, just to see how this version of Eddie and the symbiote go about being, well, Spider-Man. So again, dig it. It's just about the concept alone makes me want to keep seeing more of it. So again, good stuff. I like it. As for the second story, this one's actually pretty touching. While I will admit it did confuse me, and still kind of does, about the idea of a universe where the entire Brock family is bonded to the symbiote, and how all of them are constantly fighting to maintain control of it and keep it from overwhelming them. And we do see that the symbiote tries. It tries to get in their heads and make them go down dark paths, especially when Anne was having doubts about what happened to her son. Sorry, Chinny jumped on the bed. But at the end of the day, the idea, it's still an interest. It's actually just, I think what saves the story is just the familial bond. I love seeing the conflict that we see Anne going through, as essentially her instincts to protect her son kind of are clashing with her innate fear of the symbiote and what it could do to her if she ever loses control. And so seeing her son dealing with this exact same problem and ultimately failing to save him when he loses control, it's a great conflict. And ultimately, while the focus is kind of on Dylan and what he's doing with this, and what the symbiote is doing to him, the main story and the main character is, believe it or not, and as she has to try and get over herself because her son is in danger and she needs to help him. And at the end, and it's sweet. I love it. It's just really nice seeing this familial bond and ultimately the love that this mother has for her child prevail over her fear as as she uses her portion of the Venom symbiote to knock Dylan out and free him from the symbiote's clutches. It's sweet and it's nice. And by the end of the story, when she is just comforting him and letting him know it's okay, and we see the Brock family just coming to terms and wanting to again, sorry about this, Chindy is missing Chindy. And wanting to actually teach Dylan how to control it like Eddie and Ann controlled their portions of the symbiote. It's sweet. I love it. It's nice. And it just kind of gives me all the warm fuzzies, especially since the final shot of that story had them walking away into the sunset together with Leah. It's a nice story that at its emotional core is essentially about the bonds between family, and it makes me smile, and it's just an overall sweet story. Probably my favorite in this one, so go figure. At the end, so overall, again, a unique take. And then finally we have the Samurai Venom one. This one is actually more action-packed than the other ones, and like the first two stories, it definitely has an interesting premise. Does that make the story good? It depends. The story, I think, in my opinion, is just all right. It's again one of those stories that gives you a little bit of information about the situation in this world, like with Tatsuya finding the Venom samurai sword and then having it latch onto him. But at the same time, it also feels like one of those stories that you need to know prior continuity and understanding. And the sense this is meant to be Samurai Venom's first appearance in comics, there is no pre-existing information. It's just he's Venom. It's just he's Venom, and Oscorp is hunting him. Now that being said, they do at least give you enough information. So you're able to get the whole idea that he used to work for Oscorp. He found this thing, and now that he's bonded to it, then that makes him a target. Hence, why he has to fight against them, and why he's on the run. I do at least like that, and they do showcase there is an interesting conflict there with him being bonded to the symbiote. Since after all, control combined with you can't. It's hard to control a symbiote, very hard. And even when Tatsuya does actually use the sword to try and help Marion and the other passengers on the train out, there are moments when he almost gives in and loses control of this thing. So it's one of the. So ultimately, it's not. Ultimately, there is a unique conflict there. Again, sorry, Chindy's jumping on the bed. And so, at the very least, I do like that, and I do kind of, and it does make his story very interesting as we want to see him come out on top, as he's clearly a noble person who wants to help others. But ultimately, he at the same time, the risk of using this power means that he potentially loses himself to the dark side of the symbiote. And that, I think, is interesting, especially when at the end of the story, he essentially channels that anger towards helping the passengers by decoupling the parts of the train that Vulture and Scorpion are on, and ensuring that while the majority of the train may be gone, the passengers on board the train will at least survive. So that does still make for an interesting story, and it does make me more interested in this tale, because Tatsuya, at the end of the day, is an interesting character, and I do want to see more of his journey and how he kind of comes to terms with being bonded to the Venom symbiote. With that said, where the story kind of falters, in my opinion, is again, it feels like it's trying to be part of a bigger whole. Like I said, we're thrown into this world without a lot of prior information, and while we can still guess what's going on based on the clues we're given, and it's done well, it feels like the story wants to be continued, but I don't feel like this is going to be a story that will be continued, and as a result, it leaves too many things open at the end. It feels like they're trying to lead into something greater. Like this is all going to be a bigger ongoing story, which, if it is, good. I'd love to see more of this, and I do like Tatsuya's journey. It just feels like it's missing some parts in there as a result, and pretty much the story itself is entertaining and good, and does have a great conflict, and does have a great central focus with Tatsuya as he tries to control this power, and you see the battle between the man and the monster. It still feels like it doesn't feel like it comes to a proper conclusion, because while by the end he's found a way to channel this energy, he still doesn't know how to fully control it yet. So again, it feels like there could be more. But with that said, what we have is still genuinely good. Good main character, interesting concept for a Venom. Like, it has great conflict, great action, some honestly unique versions of both Scorpion and the Vulture. At the end of the day, a unique alternate take on the Venom story that I would be open to seeing more of. So On the whole, like I said, Spider-Man story, great concept. I think it's executed pretty well. The Venom story, just violent, violent but heartwarming and just full of gushy emotions that made me smile. And the Samurai Venom story, very, very action-packed, great central conflict, and good main character. On the whole, and overall decent story. So on the whole, it's a great first issue, and quite frankly, it's a nice breath of fresh air. It's a nice breath of fresh air compared to the last Venomverse story, which, again, I did like that version. I did like Venomverse there too, but again, what helped kind of hold that one back was the fact that most of the Venoms were literally just what if insert name of character got the symbiote instead of Eddie Brock. So it's interesting to see these genuinely unique and different takes on the story of Venom that essentially just take the concept and then just go off in its own direction with it. So again, good stuff. And well, there are more stories like that in this miniseries, and I actually can't wait to talk about them. So, well, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. Good first issue, and I can't wait, and I hope to see you on Thursday as we look at issue 2. So till then, hope you have a good night, and take care.